Hey, I'm back. Sorry, I had a phone call I had to take care of. I know I could have walked away, but I didn't want the the recording to just run and then you guys get so lost on you know it would have just been difficult for me, so I had to stop it. I do apologize, but I'm about to continue. Hopefully, I'm getting ready to continue right now. Yeah. Why is he called the truth there? Because he sees three hills or three rocks that remind us of the Trinity. Very religious man. Yup, yup. What happened? The next day he lands in South America, right here. Do you know Columbus refused to get off the ships? His ships landed in South America, but he never stepped foot on Native American shore. He said he had all the rights. He said this. What he celebrated, never stepped foot on it. And it was by way of the African intelligence who told him, and you remember the quote from James Herrera, that he knew about the secret landmass to the south, Brazil and South America, and he brought that information back to the king and queen of Spain. So the intelligence of the Africans, who he called Black and Tawny, that made it possible for Columbus to take that secret landmass. Alright? That secret landmass, and this is how he landed in South America and Brazil about the African intelligence. So you have many documents. You have the oceanographic currents. You have the seas, Gossypium hirsutum, Barcrustatum, Gossypium hirsutum. These are seas now. Gossypium hirsutum and Gossypium hirsutum Barcrustatum. Okay? Gossypium barbadens. You have the oral tradition, what the Native Americans told Columbus. You have what the Portuguese documented. This is documentation from them. So you have all of this information that deals with Columbus by way of the African intelligence. Very seldom mentioned. You don't read about it because that book is very difficult to find. Everything I quoted comes from the Letters and Voyages of Columbus by John Boyd Thatcher. It's written in Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. It's very difficult. You get lost in a footnote. He said some interesting things. It was the Moors who he learned from and had conversations with. He witnessed the expulsion of that last African general, King Abdul, and then he turned the other cheek and didn't help the Africans. Now I want to leave this subject because I want to go to my main point. That was around the 13th century. You had other voyages that took place around the same era, 14th century rather, but you had the Mandingo. Their voyages was around the 13th century, and the Sungay from West Africa around 1450. We know that the Mandingos were Muslims, came to America because we found an African word for banana used in America called bacoca or bacocua. Now the banana is not indigenous, meaning it's not it's not native to Africa. It is native to Asia. However, the Native Americans are not using an Asian word. They are using an African word, linguistically speaking, Bakokwa. So we know that the Mandings were over here. I want to mention that as well as the Sungay, because I want to show these in the slides. I want to move on to how the Africans influenced America's first civilization called Olmec. This is very important. Now, please remember, it is not just Central America or South America. At that time, Mexico included parts of California, Colorado, and Texas. So it was America, point blank. Now, we do know that at that time, this was not called America. It was called India by Columbus. He called it that because he thought he was an Indian. But when we talk about America today as we know it, it was the Africans who were honorary members of that first civilization called Olmec. Please understand the difference between a civilization and a culture. When I speak of a civilization, I'm speaking of something that stands out. You can identify it. It's advanced in the arts and sciences, a writing script. For example, when we think of the great African civilization of the Nile Valley, ancient Egypt, Nubia, and Kush, we think of the pyramids. The great black genius, the world's first multi-genius, Imhotep, the temple complexes, the Sphinx, etc. In cultures, there were many cultures in America, but it was the Olmec culture, the Olmec civilization, mind you, who had either a direct or indirect profound influence on all native civilizations. Maya, Inca, Peru, Guatemala, Palenque, Honduras, etc. And the Africans were part of that first civilization. That's what this next lecture is going to be on. I will now show you the slides. This took place in the Gulf Coast of Mexico.
As you can see, we're talking about the Olmec right in the middle here. The Gulf Coast of Mexico. Okay, well, I'll leave it there.
He's having technical difficulty, guys. Sorry.
There are three major areas that we're going to look at. The Olmec civilization that began around 1500 in San Lorenzo and 1200 BC in Laventa, which was the heartland of the Olmec civilization, a heart ceremonial complex. It was a ceremonial religious center in Laventa. These are three major areas. Treslopates, San Lorenzo, and Laventa. The three major areas where you find 16 African colossal stoneheads. Do not short-term your history. These are not just Africans. These were priests, kings, and the ruling class, the elite class of America's first civilization called Olmec. When did this begin? This began around 1858. Mexican peasants found an enormous stone head. It was taller than a man, and it was said to weigh 10 tons. Now, during that time, most of your Mexican archaeologists, Jose Melgar, Alfredo Severo, as well as others, were astonished. They were puzzled, and they were just surprised. And they wrote about, and they said that for the first time, we found an African presence in America. And they spoke of these as Ethiopian braids. As Ethiopians. They described them. They wrote about it. It was published in Mexican bulletins, but very little was said about it afterwards. At that particular time, we understand not a lot was known about this first civilization. So then you had the first scientific excavation that took place between the Smithsonian Institute, the National Geographic, and the University of California. This was a joint excavation that took place. They went back in 1938-40 to Treslopates. They visited that, they found 4 other heads, then they went to Laventa. To their surprise, they found 4 other colossal heads. What is important about this head here? This is from Treslopates. This is Treslopates number 2. This is in the order that they were found in, numerically speaking. However, when you look at the back of this head, this is what you see. This photograph, this picture, has been suppressed for
Again, you guys can go on YouTube to see what he was talking about.
The Smithsonian Institute or any traveling association. It was placed in the Smithsonian files and kept very quiet in American academia. It wasn't until several years ago that an African-American photographer, Wayne Chandler, discovered this in the Smithsonian files. Never, ever been published. It wasn't until 1985 that Dr. Ivor Grant Certimer, and I quote, was able to publish this. So it wasn't until 1985 that this was published in Nile Valley Civilization, as well as African presence in early America before Columbus. Never been published by any European academia at all. And you must understand why. Look at those braids. No European or Native Americans had that type of hair. Look at the thickness of those braids. Look at the details in them. Look at the African beads. Strictly Ethiopian, i.e. African braids. Could be dreadlocks. That's the front of that head. That's the back of it. Here's another close-up of it. Look at it. Unbelievable. I searched, and I stayed on Wayne Chandler's case, and the brother finally got the photograph to me. And I was happy. Because this is what you need. You will not see this in other books. This is the front of that now. This is the color photograph of it. Notice, as you can see, the features has been somewhat deteriorated because a lot of these are out in the weather. These are priest kings, man. Alright? Notice the braids, the same braids you see there. You can barely see them now. That's why that black and white picture was very, very important. Look at the braids now. They're practically deteriorating. Now, in my view, I would love to see some athletes as well as some entertainers get together a fund and preserve these hairs. This represents us in America's first civilization. I would love to see them do that. Because the Mexicans are very poor. They don't have the money. Now, you know, these were Europeans. They would have an enormous fund going on, a housing for all of these stoneheads. This would represent them. But since it doesn't, they don't particularly care about this. Many of these are sitting right out in the park in Mexico. Sad. This is in 1938. Matthew Stallings at that time was then The leading excavator, his personal assistant was Clarence Weiner. Okay? And this is him measuring one of the Stonehenge from Trezor Partes. He was then at that time the leading director of the ethnographic department at the Smithsonian Institute. This is that hand today in color, another photograph of the one. Here's in black and white. Look at the features there. Look how those features stand out then. Okay? That's in 1930. Look at them now. Still there, but they kind of deteriorated. You can't see it as much. Very important. Now you see the importance of those black and white photographs. This is Matthew Sterling, and then you see one priest king from the Benton. This is said to be 11 feet tall. 11 feet. This is from Trezor Partes. Now, I had some students, incidentally, I'm doing 15 speaking engagements on the African presence in America and their profound scientific and technological impact that they left on America's first civilization. I'm all the way up the Internal Revenue Service, 11,601 Roosevelt Boulevard. So you know, if I sound a little hoarse, it's because I got a long way to go. Many more speeches. I had some students, or rather some teachers. I was at Strawberry Mansion this morning, Simon Gratz yesterday, and on Comcast Cable Monday. Some teachers said, well, I'm not sure if that's African because of the slanted eyes. It could be an Asiatic type. Now, I like to say that if that's not African, with those slanted eyes, then that's not African. You find African types all throughout the Kalahari as well as South Africa. You will find them among the Khoikhoi, misnomered Hottentots by Europeans, and the San people, misnomered Bushmen by Europeans. You will find what's called the epichytic eye folds. Why do Asiatics have them? They have them because in Asia you have a lot of sand, you have a lot of wind. It helps them to keep the sand out their eyes. You find unmixed Africans with those same slanted eyes. Right here in West Philadelphia, you had years ago Clarence Tillman. You remember him? Look at those slanted eyes on him. So if this is not African, then that's not African. This is from the Benton, a close-up. Remember, these are priest kings. What's said about this here is that some of the teeth are missing. According to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, this is something that's very unusual in Native American civilization. Something that the Africans brought over. Okay? These, incidentally, were made of hard basalt rock. That's a hard, dense, dark, grayish rock. It was transported some 50 to 80 miles from the quarries and transported by way of rafts to the other side of the river and placed on ceremonial platforms facing east, looking toward the Atlantic. Remember, the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. They were also painted black, according to Science Digest article by Bush Rosenberger, and they had patches of purple on them, patches of purple. Purple was symbolic of royalty. And you see it again. I want you to understand the importance of how the Native Americans took time out. Notice the broad nose, the thick lips, the deep carvings, okay? Very important. Dr. Ivan Van Sertima said that cross, that you see right in the middle there, is cross. He said that that served as a fertility figure and was something that is also brought over by way of the Africans. Something unusual at that time for America's first civilization called Olmec. Notice the cross, it's right in the middle. Notice the military type helmets as well as the strap. Okay? Because I want you to understand where these come from. I'm going to speak about it in a minute, where these Africans came from, and prove we have a lot of evidence now that we know they came from ancient Egypt and Nubia. We will show that in a minute. That's a side profile. You know when they take mud shots, they go side profiles, back profiles, bend down profiles. I got all kind of profile shots for you. You may as well see the African genius from all sides. As late as 1984, you still had a colossal stone here, still lying in the swamps. To my knowledge, it has not been moved. I don't know if it's because of political reasons. I don't know if it's because of financial reasons, but it's still lying in the swamps as late as 1984. This is from a magazine called Mexico de Conocido, which means Mexico the Unknown. It's unknown because the African genius is there. That's right. I sent the rate for this magazine. I remember seeing a videotape with Alexander von Buchenwald on it, and he showed this when Dr. Ivan Van Sertima was in Mexico. And I wrote to the University of Mexico. They couldn't send me the magazine because